So we're here with Steve Lavin of Fox Sports, CBS Sports, the Pac-12 network, prior head coach at St. John's and UCLA. Also an assistant at my alma mater, Purdue University. So it's very exciting to talk to you. Steve, thank you for being on the show with us today.
It's great to be with you.
I'm going to jump in right away. And, when you played college ball as a kid, I mean, I don't want to make you sound old or anything like that, but
Right.
it wasn't like, you had ESPN everywhere and you had 20 different sports channels and a place to upload highlights to YouTube from a phone. Like, how does a kid in high school from your era get noticed by the scouts, like to get yourself recruited? Like what was that process like for you?
Well, I was fortunate that I attended a high school in Northern California. Recently, the name changed to Archie Williams High School, who was a longtime teacher at Sir Francis Drake High School. So the school was Sir Francis Drake High School, the Pirates, and they, had a reputation in Northern California for being a basketball powerhouse, just north of San Francisco. And it was an outstanding team. I was a very, average basketball talent, small college prospect. I ended up playing Division II basketball at San Francisco State University and then Chapman University because my coach left San Francisco State after my sophomore year. He was a mentor of mine. His name was Kevin Wilson. And so when he went to Chapman, I followed him because I had an interest in coaching. So, but going back to Drake High School, we won back-to-back state championships, had an excellent coach named Pete Hayward. And he lived in the gym and had a great feel for offensive basketball, but was underrated defensively too. Three-quarter court, man-to-man, full court pressure, and really could teach shooting in terms of shot mechanics. And so his teams through the decades shot the ball very well. But 11 of the 13 players in the team went on to play at some level of college. Steve Kenelvort played at Santa Clara. Dan Hunt played at Portland. Chris Fulton played at Portland, then transferred to Utah. A player named Doug DeVore played at Sam Houston State, among other schools. Jimmy Saya played at San Luis Obispo, and also we ended up reconnecting at Chapman University, and then later working together at UCLA. He was an assistant with our staff. So the two state championships, and we were 65-1 over the 2 years. And we won, I think, 56 consecutive games and broke Bill Walton's Helix High School record. At that point, 33-0 was the best record in California history. We went 34-0 in our senior year. And again, I was a, very limited, athlete, but fortunate to be on these great teams because, to your question, how do you get recognized? It's winning. And so, we played in, packed gymnasiums throughout Northern California, and there really was a following, not only our fans in terms of Sir Francis Drake, but just people that were basketball fans really enjoyed watching our team play. It was an excellent passing team. And again, we shot the ball well. We played at pace. And so that's what led to some of the players in the team that weren't stars like myself having an opportunity to get recruited to smaller colleges. And I was recruited by Occidental, Pomona Pitzer, but I chose San Francisco State because it's where I was born and it was close to our family. And I figured I was going to finish there until my coach had the opportunity at Chapman University, which led to me transferring and finishing up school there. And then from there went to Purdue, and the rest kind of fell from there in terms of the last 33 years.
Sorry, Ken, I want to ask this quick. On the topic of Purdue, you finished school, and all of a sudden you're an assistant for Gene Keady, like in the Big Ten, in a pretty good era of Big Ten basketball. How did that work out? How did that come into play?
Well, at a young age, I realized that I had an interest in coaching, and that was, partly growing up in a basketball family. My father played basketball, and he chose not to coach. He went into higher education and education at all levels. He was an English, literature, philosophy, a poetry teacher. He authored 19 books on writing and composition. He was the director, co-founder of the Bay Area Writing Project at Cal Berkeley, which was a program. It's still in existence now. There's 200 writing centers throughout the country, but it started at Cal Berkeley and co-founded with my father was a person named Jim Gray, another outstanding educator. But I think being, in a family that had an appreciation for basketball, my 3 older brothers all played as well. And so the love of the game, even though I was late to basketball, I started with soccer and baseball and then came over to basketball, in my own time when I felt comfortable, transitioning to basketball full time. So I think that led to, experiences of being at summer camps and working my high school coaches' summer camps and having success coaching, younger players, 5th grade, 6th graders, 7th graders, winning championships at these camps. And then in college, I started writing letters to Bobby Knight, Mike Krzyzewski, Gene Keady, Jerry Tarkanian, a lot of other coaches that, weren't as high profile, like Jim Brandenburg, Hank Egan, some assistant coaches, Mike LaGarza, who's an assistant at the University of San Diego, Mike Dunlap, who was an assistant at Iowa under George Raveling, later at USC, Tim Gergovich, who was the assistant at UNLV for Jerry Tarkanian and kind of the orchestrator of their defense. He was really like the Buddy Ryan of the Running Rebels when it came to his expertise on defense. So I started just asking, this was old school, before email, before the bombardment of the electronic media and being able to DM people and reach out through different, social platforms. So it was the old write a letter, put a stamp, get the address and put it in the mailbox. And surprisingly, the majority of the coaches wrote back, and I was asking for, the steps I should take if I someday wanted to be a head coach, to be able to walk in their shoes. And so it was everything from camps and clinics I should attend to the books I should read, and just their overall kind of advice on, studying the coaches I respected and seeing the different approaches to the game. And then eventually, building your own philosophy in terms of what you're going to be comfortable with for the opportunity, or so when you get the opportunity to be a head coach at whatever level it is, you're further down the line in your thinking and approach and the style that you want to have as a coach.
So I'd like to take this moment to ask you, what advice would you give to someone looking to get into coaching now?
Really good question. I think in a similar way, the important thing is to, seek out the coaches that you respect and, visiting practices. That's ultimately what I did after writing letters to those coaches. I went back and spent time at Indiana. I couch surfed with some of the team managers as well as the players, Cree Smith and Brian Sloan, who were playing for Bob Knight on the Hoosiers team at that point, let me crash on their couch. Craig Hartman was a manager, later an assistant. He let me stay with him as well. And Ron Felling, who was an assistant coach, stayed at his place. And I was there about 3 weeks and was able to take notes, get into the locker room, pregame, halftime, postgame. And it was a, transformative experience to be able to watch Coach Knight on a daily basis in practice for 3 weeks. And then to sit on the bench for their home games. I was able to, be in the timeouts. And so I learned a great deal, also inspired me in terms of, I knew after the trip to Indiana and Purdue, because I also visited Purdue for a couple of weeks and did the same thing there in terms of attending practices and sitting behind the bench at home games with the Boilermakers and, staying with some of the assistant coaches. Kevin Stallings let me stay at his place. And there were some managers there, Gary Harsh, Alan Major, and some other friends that I've now known for, 34 years that took care of me back then in 1988. And then I applied, to the schools that I really had an interest in attending and working, under those coaches. And I was hired by Coach Keady in 1988 as a graduate assistant. So he opened the door to me 33 years ago. So I think going out and observing practices and, taking notes and asking good questions, being an expert listener and using the ears and the eyes is really important. And then there's the practical aspect of that from the standpoint that you develop, relationships with coaches, assistants, and head coaches that are in the industry who are already off and running in terms of working at the craft of teaching and coaching. And that's how we learn, and then ultimately you have to, stay true to what you believe in, but that comes with time. First you just want to study and learn, find the Mr. Miyagi's, find the mentors, the wise old owls, or even some young Turks, some young coaches that are blazing a trail. And I think that's what I would advise, young people that are interested in coaching. You want to learn first, and then down the line, you crystallize your own thinking, your own philosophy, your own approaches, things that fit, things that you have conviction about in terms of the way you want your teams to play.
So while you were at Purdue, you had a young player there for the last couple of years you were there, who's gone on to have a pretty good head coaching career himself, Matt Painter. I was a student there actually when the transition from the Keady era to the Painter era started. When you were coaching him as a freshman and a sophomore, did you see him as the coaching type, like this guy is going to be a head coach and a very good head coach when he was that young?
Yeah, he had, a number of attributes that, led me to believe he would become an outstanding coach. Number one, he was curious. He asked a lot of questions. Even though he was a player on the team, he was curious about, the strategic aspects of the game. And he would come in our, coaches lounge where we'd be breaking down game film and building our scouting reports in preparation for an upcoming game. And he'd sit down, with our staff and participate, and he was the only player that did that. Now, there were a lot of players that came in and did film work in preparation for a game or in reviewing, our last game. Players would come in on their own, and we'd sit down with them sometimes, individually to, just use film, video as, an instructive tool for, helping them become a better player. And everyone learns differently. Some players, you can draw it up on the board. Some players, you can move them like a chess piece on the court. Others are very visual and they have to see it first. And we all learn differently in every aspect of life. So that's one of the keys to good teaching and coaching is, understanding and getting a better feel for how each of your players learn. And because at the end of it, you want an informed basketball player. Not only about their own game, but about their teammates' game. And then also in preparation for opponents when you're looking at tendencies, strengths, vulnerabilities of an opponent and looking for a competitive edge so that you can win more often than you lose. But Matt had that, insatiable appetite, curiosity about coaching. And he grew up, in the Hoosier State. And being from Muncie, he'd been around good coaches, Rick Majerus, Dick Hunsaker, some outstanding coaches and teachers that were at Ball State. He also was friends with Pat Knight, Bobby Knight's son. So he grew up around Bob Knight and really grew up an Indiana Hoosiers fan. Interestingly, he ends up becoming a Boilermaker as a player and has had this, tremendous career and on track to be a Hall of Famer in my book. Yet as a child, he was rooting for the Hoosiers. And what's that old phrase that, we plan and God laughs, or God writes straight with crooked lines. We have an idea of what we think we want to do, but often destiny or fate play a hand in matters, and we find ourselves elsewhere. And oftentimes in a better place. A gift reveals unexpectedly or in a mysterious manner. And that's clearly Matt Painter's story. So he has a feel for the game. And I also think he's improved from year to year as a coach. And that's a good sign for Purdue basketball, because I think his best years in coaching are in front of him. And he's already had remarkable numbers when you look at the success he's had at Purdue. And he was the ideal succession plan to Coach Keady, who set the bar pretty high in his 24, 25 seasons with Purdue. But very few could fill those shoes so seamlessly, and really has checked all the boxes in terms of what you look for in a head coach. And I love his feel for the game and his rapport with the players. And, he can get fiery, but overall, he's got a relatively calm demeanor. He picks his spots, which I think for this generation is a good thing, because players in this age, they'll tune you out. They'll go tone deaf on you if you're constantly nagging, whining, complaining, screaming at them. Those days of coaching are done. There's a few Mohicans that still could pull that off. But once they retire, I don't think we'll ever see that style of coaching again.
So in 1991, you moved over to UCLA. Can you maybe tell us a couple stories of memorable moments from while you were there?
Yeah, UCLA, boy, there are so many. It's 12 years total, 1991 to 2003. And I was 26 years old when I arrived at UCLA and 38 when I was shown the door 12 years later. And, Purdue kind of launched my career in terms of, Coach Keady opening the door to be able to work in the Big Ten under a legendary coach, and to have a foundation put in place by working under Coach Keady for 3 years was valuable. And I'll be indebted and grateful, eternally grateful to Coach Keady and the opportunity he gave me at Purdue. But I met Coach Wooden while I was at Purdue, and Coach Wooden was a 3-time All-American for the Boilermakers from 1928 to 1932. And when I was at Purdue, Coach Wooden would come back for, various events like a basketball family reunion, or to give a talk to a school on campus. And I was fortunate that, I was designated to pick him up at the airport, bring him to campus, get him to his hotel, get him over to practice, get him to the event, down to a bookstore for a signing of, a book on Coach Wooden that may have been, recently released, or his Pyramid of Success, that he would often autograph, personalize for fans. And so getting to know him played a part in ending up at UCLA. So that Big Ten kind of 6 degrees and the Boilermaker family plays a part. Also, Mark Godfrey was an assistant at UCLA. I got to know him, and that led to meeting Coach Herrick and, ultimately coming to UCLA. But so learning from John Wooden during those 12 years was one of the high points. One of the high points of my time at UCLA. Also, the national championship in 1995. It was the pinnacle of Coach Herrick's career. It was the 11th national championship for UCLA, the only championship in men's basketball at UCLA that was won by a coach other than John Wooden. And it was an outstanding staff. Lorenzo Romar was on that staff, Mark Godfrey. I was fortunate to also be on staff, and great leaders. Our senior class, Ed O'Bannon, National Player of the Year, led us from start to finish. Tyus Edney, our point guard, had an outstanding career, but his senior year in particular, he was playing at the highest level. And George Zidek from the Czech Republic was a 7-foot center that kind of anchored us offensively and defensively. And we had 2 outstanding freshmen that contributed, Toby Bailey and J.R. Henderson. Chris Johnson was a freshman as well, but didn't play as often in that 95 season. Cameron Dollar, Charles O'Bannon, Ed O'Bannon's younger brother. So it was a special year. We went 32-1, and I think we lost 1 game at Oregon to start Pac-10 play. And then there was a loss against Cal that we later picked up because of some NCAA issues that Cal had. So technically, we're 32-1, but we were 31-2 in terms of the actual, games that were played. And then becoming a head coach at UCLA. That's a situation coming from a town of 25, population of 2,500, and graduate from a school of 2,000. I never dreamt that I'd become the head coach at UCLA. And so that was pretty special. I was an assistant for 5 years, 7 years as a head coach, 12 years total. And, there isn't a day that goes by that I don't look back fondly on my time at UCLA.
Before we talk about the head coaching real quick, I just want to talk, you mentioned Tyus Edney in 95. During that NCAA tournament, he had an iconic play that bailed you out of a game you were losing to Mizzou. And he went the full length of the court, coast to coast, in 4.8 seconds and nailed the winner. And I went back and I watched that video the other day, and I could see you come running out on the court with the rest of the team celebrating. And was there a bit of shock on your face there? Do you remember what?
Well, there were a couple things. I had actually injured my knee. I had an ACL injury playing some pickup basketball that prior summer. And so initially I, ran out and then realized, I was still in the middle of rehabilitating that knee. And that's why I started hopping 4 or 5 or 6 hops, because I could feel the knee was about to give out, and actually kind of tweaked it some.
Oh, man.
And so to instinctively protect it, I just hopped on the stronger leg. And then, we were so relieved to, advance, because the story ends, the dream ends if Tyus doesn't make that shot. And it changed the rest of our lives. We were going to be fired on Monday of that week if we had lost that game.
Oh, man.
And, later the athletic director and the president, shared that story. So we would have all been out of work and, needing to get the resumes together. And then that affects everything moving forward, because really interesting. So I always said, if I had a child, the first child would be named Tyus, whether it was a boy or a girl, because he definitely is, oh
man, that's unreal.
A player that changed our lives. Again, we talk about the destiny and fate, playing a hand. So that led to him being on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And Bob Myers was a walk-on. He's now the general manager of the Golden State Warriors, and has provided great leadership for the Warriors, a couple NBA championships now under his belt. But he was a walk-on, and he's the one that actually grabbed Tyus. And so he ended up being on the cover of Sports Illustrated as well. And later, he was at the White House and on the Tonight Show with Jay Leno, and went to Disneyland, as the champions do. And so kind of a remarkable story as well. That's for another podcast, but Bob Myers, kind of a Forrest Gump story in terms of, what a success he's been, and using the experience as a student athlete and maximizing that experience in terms of setting up for himself, for life after UCLA.
And in the post-game interview, Coach Herrick was asked, why did you think he could get coast to coast that quickly? And he made some response of, well, Jerry West, when he was with the Lakers, did it in 3. I had no doubt he could do it in 4.8.
Yeah. And I think Jerry West, though, might have been a long jumper, to beat someone. He did push it up the floor, but I don't think he got a layup, but I could be wrong. Jerry West hit so many game-winning shots. Maybe he had one that was a drive and then another that was almost from half court, if I'm not mistaken. He was clutch. And the interesting thing is we did a drill every day, not every day, but let's say 2 times a week. It was a full court drill. And that's one of the aspects also I think Coach Herrick alluded to was, being guarded in the full court and putting, 5 seconds on the clock, and you had to go coast to coast and score it. And Tyus was the only one that could do that on a regular basis. No one else in the team could get from one end of the floor to the other and score. And so we had seen it all year long in this full court drill that we put in that year. Interestingly, again, back to destiny or fate and how things have to line up when you win a championship. And you look at, championship runs, so often there's a buzzer shot along the way in the NCAA tournament that I think leads to a certain kind of feel of invincibility that is a catalyst for cutting down the nets. Christian Laettner against Kentucky had one of those shots. We know about Tyus. There's been others. And, Chris Jenkins for Villanova more recently against North Carolina hits that buzzer shot. So usually in the run of 6 games to cut down the nets, there's been a game where you come back, or you get a break, a bounce of the ball, an official's call, something that goes your way, an unexpected contributor off the bench, because you have to be good for 6 consecutive games. And you have to be fortunate not have an injury. We were fortunate. We didn't have one injury all season until Tyus's injury in the semifinals against Oklahoma State. But we had a player, Cameron Dollar, who stepped in and was ideally suited to lead us against Arkansas's full court press, because Cameron could slice through defenses like a hot knife through butter and then make great judgments in terms of when to lob the ball, when to keep it himself, when to bring it back out and get us into our sets. And as a sophomore, Cameron showed exceptional poise and composure. And if we don't have Cameron, I don't know if we beat Arkansas that night. And I think 75% of our shots were dunks or layups because Arkansas extended defensively to 40 minutes of hell. But we had a team that could pass, catch, shoot the ball, play at high speeds, finish at the rim. And that allowed us to win that game comfortably. The more challenging game, interestingly, wasn't against the defending national champion Arkansas Razorbacks. It was against Eddie Sutton's Oklahoma Sooners with Big Country Reeves and company.
Yeah.
That was more of a grinding, methodical game, and Tyus got hurt. It was a very physical kind of hand-to-hand combat approach, and that's how Eddie Sutton's teams play. They shortened the game. They didn't let you get out in transition. One of the most memorable games in that NCAA tournament was against UConn in the Elite Eight, Oakland Coliseum. It was a shootout. They had Ray Allen, Donnie Marshall, Kevin Ollie, Darren Sheffer. It was one of the most impressive games. I remember, watching Ray Allen, and it was clear that he was a future Hall of Fame player. And I think if they were in a different region, we would have met, in the Final Four or the national championship. But it just happened that we were both in the West region and met each other in the Elite Eight. But the 2 best teams that year, in my book, were Jim Calhoun's Huskies and Jim Herrick's UCLA Bruins, the 2 Jims.